I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. President Trump has a full plate of conflicts and confrontations, from China to Venezuela, from Iran to North Korea. That's on top of his many clashes with House Democrats. Will all this outweigh a solid economy in next year's elections? The Yankees have overcome a rash of player injuries this year to claw their way to the top of their division, but there was a much bigger comeback in Yankees history, from their horrible teams of the early 90s to their dynasty just a few years later. Times sports writer Bill Pennington is here to talk about his new book, Chumps to Champs. But we begin with the battle over abortion. 8 states have passed bills this year to restrict abortions. 5 have passed the so-called heartbeat bills that prohibit abortions after 6 to 8 weeks of pregnancy. Alabama passed the most draconian. It's almost a total ban, no exceptions for rape or incest, and a 99-year prison term for doctors who perform an abortion. Here's how Senators Gillibrand and Harris reacted to the Alabama bill.
It's nothing short of an attack on women's basic human rights and civil rights.
Women's health care is under attack, and we will not stand for it.
This is a hot-button culture war issue, pitting claims of morality against the defense of women's rights. But in an election cycle, it's also very much a political issue. How will Democrats and Republicans approach abortion in their campaigns? Does either side have an edge in this fight? Trip Gabriel, a national correspondent for the New York Times, Mara Gay, a member of the Times editorial board, and John Mollenkoff, a distinguished professor of political science at the CUNY Graduate Center. Now, I thought the Supreme Court had laid down the law of the land, that is policy for the government. How can the states chip away at the right to abortion?
Well, any state can pass any law it wants, Sam, and these, recent kind of heartbeat bills that you're referring to, and are designed to be bait that they hope that the new, more conservative Supreme Court will take. I mean, they are likely, or not just like, they're almost assuredly going to be overturned by federal appellate courts, and then the Supreme Court will have a choice whether it wants to take one of these bills or not. So the state lawmakers and the activists in these very red states that are pushing these very restrictive bills that in some cases will criminalize abortion are making a frontal assault on the Roe decision.
So, Mara?
Sure. So that's right. And, just to broaden it out a little bit, this is the culmination of a 45 plus year effort by conservatives and by the Republican Party to pack the courts from top to bottom with folks who are not just conservative, but who are pro-life, and also to chip away at Roe v. Wade until it is eventually overturned by the Supreme Court. Brett Kavanaugh, obviously, most recent justice to join the court, is what they're pinning their hopes on, who they're pinning their hopes on. And I think on the other side, folks who are pro-choice and folks who, much of the Democratic Party, have not paid enough attention to the courts. And so that's where these advocates, these pro-life advocates or anti-abortion advocates, are hoping to win their battle, because a majority of the American public doesn't actually agree with them. A majority of the American public is pro-choice. And so this is the only route that's available to them.
Yeah, I thought the issue had gone away in a sense, that the polls suggested that most Americans were at least tolerant of abortion. John, what are the precedents for the Supreme Court turning around, almost reversing itself on an issue like this?
Well, they're few and far between. It has happened, and this could be an historic moment in which the 40-plus year campaign has gotten to the point where the Supreme Court, with a new majority, will reverse precedent. But I think particularly with John Roberts as the Chief Justice, he's going to be very reluctant to do that on the eve of a presidential election. So I see it more about the Trump administration and its allies trying to rev up the base in a moment when they're concerned about losing parts of it. There was just a report by the New York Fed that the latest round of tariffs is going to impose another $400 a year on every American household. I think the polls show that there's slippage around the edges of the Trump base in a lot of places that shifted in this direction in the 2016 election. And I think that they see this as proving to the hardcore base that they can deliver on a key promise and not something that they're thinking about in terms of philosophy or values or whatever, but more in terms of day-to-day politics.
How does this play politically? There was a fascinating story in the Times the other day about the rhetoric of this debate. We now have terms like forced pregnancy. We have heartbeat bill. Of course, before we had pro-life and pro-choice. Where does this play out in a campaign?
Well, this is a White House that is determined to seek re-election, on culture war issues, not an excellent economy. For my sense, they're shooting themselves in the foot. Yes, it is about rallying the Trump base, and Trump's most staunchest supporters are white evangelical voters. I'm not even sure you need to rally those voters.
And are there enough of them, in fact?
Well, there were plenty in 2016. I mean, threading the needle that got Donald Trump into the White House is something they're going to be trying to do again. This is a very risky strategy. It has, thrown a lot of challenges at Democrats because you hear the president out there at rallies, claiming that Democrats are in favor of, murdering children after they've been born, on the delivery table, and that's very incendiary rhetoric. It's also producing a major backlash. We saw it in the recent protest rallies after the Alabama law passed, and I'm sure Planned Parenthood's fundraising is going gangbusters. They're a major contributor, to Democratic candidates and causes.
Mayor, I'm sorry.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think the strategy is provoking a backlash, and it's extremely risky politically because the reality is Donald Trump won extremely narrowly. And he didn't win the popular vote, as we know. And there are several states, for example, Michigan, where he won barely. And there are a lot of folks who stayed home, Democrats who stayed home, either because they didn't think Donald Trump could win or they didn't love Hillary Clinton. You need a perfect storm to kind of replicate that. And I think an issue like, for a Democrat or a Democratic suburban woman voter in suburban Detroit to see what's going on in Alabama, that woman's most likely, that voter is going to show up. And it's not going to be for Donald Trump. So I think that's a very risky strategy that the Republicans are.
One more quick legal question. Linda Greenhouse of the Times the other day said, what about the Establishment Clause in the Constitution? When the Alabama governor signed this bill, he said that the legislation stands as a powerful testament to Alabamians' deeply held belief that every life is precious and every life is a sacred gift from God. How does that square with the Constitution?
Well, as interpreted by the Supreme Court in the past, life does not begin at conception. And so this is an attempt to redefine the jurisprudence that is very well established. And I honestly don't think that the Supreme Court will take up the Alabama case, but we'll let the ruling stand. But they might find other states that are chipping away not so heavily as Alabama, where they can act positively.
Okay, coming up next, we'll look at Trump's troubles, the president involved in conflicts with countries on several continents, battles with House Democrats. How will that play out in the 2020 elections? President Trump dealing with conflicts, crises, confrontations on several continents, a trade war with China, tensions with Iran, more missile tests in North Korea, anti-Americanism in Venezuela. All this on top, of course, of a slew of investigations, subpoenas, impeachment threats from House Democrats. Will all this drama politically overshadow what has been a strong economy? Trip Gabriel, Mara Gay, John Mollenkopf still with us. John, you raised the possibility of that economy not staying strong forever. What's the likelihood that that will affect the election?
who knows exactly how the stock market and the economy is going to move? I don't want to predict that, but from what I hear and read, the chance of a downturn is in the back of the mind of everybody in the stock market and who's watching the economy. And if Trump manages to do a deal with China in a very well-timed point right before the election, that could work very much to his advantage. But if he doesn't, and people feel that the long growth period has run out of steam, you could see some negative trends in the market and the economy, and that would hurt the president quite badly.
China being the major foreign issue at the moment affecting the economy.
And it's having a real negative impact on places that voted for Trump, right in the wallet. And that's kind of hidden in the overall sense of we've got a great economy, the market's high, unemployment is low.
Affecting industry and also the Farm Belt, where he's trying to inject billions of dollars. In the impeachment question, we also have New York State weighing in on legislation that will probably make some of his tax returns available to Congress. We also have the courts opening up some records that he doesn't want made available. And yet we have Nancy Pelosi saying, not so fast, we're not going to be goaded into an impeachment process. What would an impeachment process do for the Democrats? What would it open up that they can't do right now?
Well, Pelosi is, walking a very narrow balancing beam. I mean, the energy in the Democratic base is pushing to the left and is certainly eager for some kind of impeachment, and it's very opposed to Donald Trump. But she also knows her majority was not won by seats that are deep blue. I mean, she owes her majority to swing districts all over the country, suburban districts in swing states like Virginia and Pennsylvania. And those are not the issues that the voters there really care about. Impeachment is not a top-of-mind issue. It ranks, probably at 10 or lower. And the Democrats that need to be reelected in 2020 to keep the Democrats in majority in the House are not talking about impeachment. So she's, that's her calculation at this point, and it's one she's getting plenty of pushback on, but she is sticking to it.
Tough line to walk, Mara.
It is. The Democrats are in a very difficult position. They need to keep their jobs and their majority, but they also need to do their job. And so that's one tough issue. The other issue here is a legal one, which is that officially starting the process of impeachment, a lot of attorneys who I've spoken to say that would actually give them better standing to get some of this information from the Trump White House than they have now. But, I think they won that one court battle, round one, the other day. So I think that the Speaker feels that this is working, even if it's a slow crawl.
If they start the process, does that inevitably lead to a vote, or can they just move it along very slowly and get what information, what evidence they may need?
My understanding is that it doesn't have to culminate in a vote, but remember, this hasn't happened a whole ton of times in the country's history. So, I think not that folks are going blind necessarily, but there's a lot of unprecedented maneuvering going on at the moment.
And of course, while we always say the Senate would not be a foregone conclusion at all in terms of a Republican-controlled Senate, would a vote in the House be a foregone conclusion?
It'll be, obviously it'll depend entirely on what kind of evidence is laid out there. I mean, the Mueller report laid out all its evidence, and it was not a, slam dunk for Democrats opposed to Trump. It's going to be a tough vote for a lot of these Democratic Congress men and women who are in swing districts. They don't want to have to run on Donald Trump in 2020. I mean, they want that to be in the back of voters' minds, but they want to really be talking about health care, and they want to be talking about, taxes and all the other, kind of bread and butter issues that move people who are in the center.
John, go ahead.
I think they just need probably to walk and chew gum at the same time, whether it's impeachment or just these ongoing subpoenas. And they, the reality is the number of Americans in this country who are undecided is very, very small. So I'm not entirely convinced that the argument against impeachment is as clear-cut politically as some might say. It's really those districts that you're talking about, those swing districts.
John, what do you think?
It's very much inside the Beltway politics, and as Tripp says, the election won't be won within 100 miles of Washington. It's going to be won in where the momentum shifted from Trump in 2016 to the Democratic House members in 2018. And if the Democratic Party can keep that shift going, then they're going to win the next election. But the issues that moved people in 2018, yes, disillusionment with Trump and thinking that he's not a very nice or capable or honorable guy is certainly there in the background. But the substantive issues on economy, healthcare, and things like that are going to be, especially I think healthcare, are going to be what people need.
I think we can throw abortion into the mix now too. I mean, that is
that
definitely
that
a
will
motivating
motivate.
issue for
Absolutely.
a lot of women and a lot of voters that are not, hardcore,
that's
evangelical anti-abortionists.
The problem with doing things that rev up your base is that you rev up the opposition at the same time.
Right, that's true.
Thanks to Tripp Gabriel, to Mara Gay, and to John Mollenkopf for joining us. And coming up next, Chumps to Champs. Times sports writer Bill Pennington is on deck with the amazing story of how the 1990s New York Yankees went from the cellar to the top of the baseball world. This is the time of year when hope springs eternal for baseball fans. No teams have been eliminated from the playoffs yet. The season got off to a grim start for the Yankees with a wave of player injuries. They've made quite a comeback all the way to the top of their division. But the Yankees made a more amazing comeback in the early 1990s, going from worst to first in just a few years. Times sports writer Bill Pennington chronicles the story in his terrific new book, Chumps to Champs, how the worst teams in Yankee history led to the 90s dynasty. Bill, welcome and thanks for joining us. How bad were the Yankees back then?
Worse than people remember, I think, frankly. I mean, they were a laughingstock in Major League Baseball, and I don't think that's too strong of a word. They had the worst team that they've ever had. They lost 95 games in 1990. Everything was really going wrong. The owner, George Steinbrenner, had been suspended permanently from baseball in 1990. They had a pitcher, Andy Hawkins, throw a 8-inning complete game no-hitter and yet lose the game. The attendance was down about 35%. TV ratings were down. The Yankees were talking about moving their home base to New Jersey. I mean, it was about as bad as it can possibly get.
And how much of that was attributable to George Steinbrenner, and how much of the comeback was attributable to Gene Michael?
Well, everything was wrong in 90 and 91 in part because of a lot of dysfunction all through the 80s, where they would constantly trade off their minor league prospects for over-the-hill ball players. So the cupboard was bare in the minors. The big league team wasn't very good either, and the team really needed a break from George, and George needed a break from baseball, which is what happened. And then Gene Michael happens to be the savior, and they're lucky to have him. He's really the star of this period.
He's the star of the book.
Yeah, he is. And as I said, they were lucky to have him. He had been a Yankee player. He had been the Yankee manager, their general manager before. He had been a third base coach, a scout, player personnel director. He just redid the entire organization, and it really is an amazing sort of resurrection, because if you had said in 1990 or 91, oh, they're going to win the World Series in 5 years, you would have been laughed out of the room.
What made him so good? And as you point out in the book, he was kind of ahead of his time when it came to, Moneyball kind of statistics.
Correct. Yeah, that's true. I mean, we didn't know it was called Moneyball, and he didn't know that was the tenants. But when he was growing up as a teen, he used to play board games, baseball board games. And for whatever reason, he went after players that had high on-base percentage, who scored a lot of runs. He didn't care about batting average. He cared about power numbers, all these things that we now consider Moneyball tenants. And he then put them in practice when he became running the franchise. And you're right, he was innovative. He was also a very sort of clever guy. He was good at kind of stealing people's stealing people in trades from other teams. He had a gift for what he was doing.
Now, what's happened since? We're now in the 21st century. According to my memory, the Yankees won a World Series in 2000, 2009. In the interim, the Red Sox won twice. Even the Cubs won. How are the Yankees doing in this century?
Well, I think there are parallels to this current period where they are rebuilding with homegrown talent. And thank God they've adjusted to that. I think they were kind of lost in the woods for 12, 13 years, trying to always be the best team they can be that year without any thought about future years. And that is what that's what's hurt them, is that they never had the long-term view. It was always trying to get there year by year, but that's not really how you build championship level teams.
So are they doing that now?
Appears to be, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting that Brian Cashman, who was an assistant to Gene Michael in the 1990s, is finally getting to do some of that. Now, he's been there all along, but I think ownership always wanted him to get to cast the team as good as it can be in that 1 year. I think the A-Rod years obviously, set them back.
Are they still the team that everyone loves to hate?
For sure. Yeah, that hasn't stopped. I mean, just try wearing a Yankee hat in certain parts of the world, Boston being one of them.
Boston definitely being one of them. What do you think the outlook for them is this season?
I mean, they're playing so well now without most of their stars. You would think that when the stars comes back, they'll play even better. It doesn't always work out that way, of course. Sometimes, the chemistry gets changed when the parts get changed. So it's going to be interesting to see if everyone gets healthy, exactly how they're going to have room for everybody.
You've covered a lot of sports for the Times. You've written a book on Billy Martin, on football, on golf. What do you like to cover best and why?
My favorite is the Olympic Games. I specialize especially in the Winter Olympic Games. It's kind of a smaller version of the summer. It's tidy.
It's colder.
It's colder, but I'm used to that. It's a lot of really almost truly amateur athletes. Now, I mean, it seems like nobody's really an amateur anymore, but that's as close as you get to it. And you just have these amazing spectacles where someone's whole life is coming down to like 30 seconds in a speed skating race or something, and you can feel the tension and you can see it in their face. And a lot of us are drawn to sports and covering sports because of watching people under pressure finding a way to perform. And that's in the Olympics, it's very obvious that that's what's going on.
People at the Times cover various categories of things, whether it's economics or politics or science. But sports is so specialized. I mean, you can cover golf, but basketball is something completely different, or football. So how do you do that?
I mean, it's funny. One of my mentors was Dave Anderson, the great columnist, and he always said to me that, we're covering the people, we're not necessarily covering the sport. I mean, yes, you have to understand how the sport works, and you have to know people in it to have a functioning understanding of what's going on. But ultimately, it comes down to the people, I think. And then most of us tend to write about the people. I know I do. That's what I was drawn to in sports.
And people are always interesting no matter what.
That's right.
Bill Pennington, the book is Chumps to Champs, How the Worst Team in Yankee History Led to the 90s Dynasty. Thanks for joining us, Bill, and I'll add my thoughts coming up next on CODA. In 1918, Allied forces commanded by General John J. Pershing took less than 7 weeks to recover 200 square miles of French territory from the German army. A century later, it has taken two city agencies more than 5 years to turn a single block in Midtown Manhattan into a pedestrian plaza to celebrate Pershing's legacy. Pershing Square at Park Avenue and 42nd Street originally was supposed to be, a square, stretching east toward Lexington and from 41st to 42nd Streets. Instead, the city sold most of the site to a developer who built a 24-story tower. Adding insult to injury, the building, named for General Pershing, was later sold to a German investor. All that remained of Pershing Square was a dingy intersection fronting on Grand Central Terminal. In 1999, Buzzy O'Keeffe's spiffy Pershing Square Cafe finally replaced a glorified tourist kiosk under the Park Avenue Viaduct. 10 years later, the city selected the Grand Central Partnership to make the most of what was left of the plaza. The viaduct itself was gussied up. Plans were announced for a cafe and outdoor seating on one street-level block of Park Avenue southbound. Permission to break ground was granted in 2014. The plaza was supposed to open 2 years later. But the plaza has become Midtown's answer to the Woolman Rink. A century-old water main had to be replaced. Nearby basements leaked. Other underground utilities had to be moved. Granite paving blocks were finally installed a year ago. But since then, Pershing Plaza remained barren, a grim still life behind a chain-link fence, evoking all quiet on the Western Front. It's supposed to open this weekend, still awaiting brass fixtures from a tardy subcontractor. 5 years. Across 42nd Street, a 57-story skyscraper will be finished faster than it has taken to fix 1 block of Park Avenue. Even World War I was briefer. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.